The sky burned as plasma blasts rained down upon the helpless colony of Zephyria. Lurian scientist Rigel watched in horror as the Crocs warships bombarded their last defenses. Zephyria was home to refugees from across the galaxy, all united in escaping the Crocs' genocidal conquest. Rigel and his fellow Lurians had poured their engineering expertise into fortifying this hidden sanctuary, but it wasn't enough, not against this fleet. General Zorgax's flagship loomed above, disgorging legions of Crocs warriors. Rigel raced to the failing shield generators, desperate to buy more time. Around him, colonists of 100 races fled to underground bunkers as the onslaught intensified. Parents clutched wailing children. The sick and elderly struggled to keep pace. Their only crime was defying the Crocs. Now annihilation awaited them all. A new shape flashed into existence, arrowing toward the Crocs fleet. Rigel stared in disbelief. It was impossible. A human warship. Humanity was a myth, a legend whispered in the darkest corners of spaceport cantinas. They were said to be demons of battle, emerging from nowhere to crush their foes before vanishing once more. And now, one had come to Zephyria. The ISS Retribution opened fire, advanced weaponry shredding Crocs ships like cheap foil. The human crew moved with uncanny precision, a choreography of destruction no Crocs admiral could match. Rigel watched the impossible made real as the Retribution crippled Zorgax's flagship, sending it plummeting in flames. In the battle's aftermath, an eerie silence fell. The Crocs were in full retreat. Zephyria still stood. But as the Retribution descended to the colony's surface, disgorging power-armored human warriors bristling with weapons, a new fear gripped the survivors' hearts. What price would these mythical saviors demand? The human captain strode forth, eyes cold as space itself. The colony's fate hung upon his next words. Upon the human response to this devastated world's plight, on the razor's edge between salvation and damnation, between survival and erasure at the hands of Crocs or human, all could only watch and wait and pray. As Captain Edward Freeman strode forth, the colonists collectively held their breath, terrified of what this imposing figure might decree. Rigel swallowed hard, preparing himself for the worst. But what happened next stunned them all. Freeman reached up and removed his helmet, revealing a chiseled yet surprisingly kind face. He smiled disarmingly at the gathered survivors and extended a hand to Rigel. Captain Edward Freeman of the ISS Retribution, we mean you no harm. We're here to help. Rigel hesitated for a moment, searching the human's eyes for any hint of deceit. Finding none, he slowly reached out and clasped Freeman's hand. The captain's grip was firm, his skin surprisingly warm. Rigel of Luria, we thank you for your aid against the Crocs. Freeman nodded, his gaze sweeping over the battered colonists. You've been through hell, but you're not alone anymore. The United Terran Federation stands with you. He gestured to his crew, who had begun unloading crates of supplies and equipment. We'll help you rebuild, and together we'll make sure the Crocs never threaten you again. As the humans and colonists began mingling, a palpable sense of relief filled the air. Children stared wide-eyed at the power-armored warriors, their fear giving way to awe. Parents wept tears of joy, hugging each other fiercely. For the first time in ages, a flicker of hope had returned to Zephyria. But not everyone shared in the jubilation. In the shadows, a group of Zephyrians led by the hot-headed warrior Zorax glowered at the humans. They're not our saviors, Zorax growled, his fists clenched. They're invaders, here to strip our world bare like all the others. His followers murmured their agreement, eyes filled with suspicion and hatred. We must act now, Zorax urged. Drive them out before it's too late. As the conspiracy took root, Freeman and Rigel walked the colony's perimeter, deep in conversation. The human captain spoke of the Crocs Empire's relentless expansion, the countless worlds enslaved or eradicated. Zephyria is the key, Freeman explained. With your strategic location and the resilience of your people, this planet could become the staging ground for a rebellion that brings the Crocs to their knees. Rigel frowned, uncertainty plain on his face. You speak of hope, Captain, but I fear we are too broken to fight. He gestured at the rubble surrounding them. Look at us. We're barely clinging to survival. Freeman clasped Rigel's shoulder firmly. I see strength in you, in all of you, and with our technology and your courage, we can achieve the impossible. His eyes gleamed with a fierce drive, an unshakable willpower that sent a shiver down Rigel's spine. And so, an unlikely alliance was forged beneath Zephyria's shattered skies. Human and colonist worked side by side, repairing, fortifying, planning for the battles to come. But even as they labored, unseen fractures widened beneath the surface. Zorax and his followers sowed seeds of dissent, their whispers poison in the ears of the fearful and the desperate. Unaware of the gathering storm, Freeman and his second-in-command, Commander Thorn, pored over star maps and tactical readouts. They spoke in hushed tones of supply lines and strike targets, of the surgical strikes that would cripple the Crocs war machine. But when Thorn mentioned Zephyria's potential as a base, Freeman fell suddenly silent, his eyes haunted. Thorn frowned. Sir, are you all right? I'm fine, Freeman snapped, a bit too quickly. He took a steadying breath. Just old memories. But as he turned back to the maps, his thoughts drifted to darker places, to the Crocs laboratories where he had been imprisoned, experimented on, tortured in ways that still woke him screaming in the night. A cold rage simmered in his gut, a thirst for vengeance that had driven him across the stars. And now, with an entire world hanging in the balance, he couldn't help but wonder, was he truly here to save these people? Or was Zephyria merely another means to an end in his own private war? Such troubling thoughts would have to wait, for at that moment, alarm klaxons began blaring across the compound. Freeman and Thorn rushed outside to find the colony in chaos. Zorax and his followers had launched their uprising, seizing control of the generator facilities and other key systems. Lay down your weapons, Zorax roared to Freeman, his eyes wild with zealotry. Around him, human and colonist security personnel formed a tense perimeter, weapons locked on each other. You have 1 hour to leave this planet, or we'll start executing your people. Freeman stepped forward, his expression cold as the void. There would be no negotiations with fanatics, no quarter given to those who would doom an entire world to the Crocs' wrath. Reaching slowly for his blaster, he met Zorax's furious gaze with a calm, terrifying tenacity. Stand down, soldier, he commanded, his voice edged with steel, or we will put you down. A heartbeat passed. 2. The air crackled with tension, every single soul in the colony seeming to hold their collective breath. And then, with a wordless battle cry, Zorax lunged forward, energy blade ignited, its amber glow reflecting madly off Freeman's visor as it arced towards the captain's throat. Time slowed to a crawl as Zorax's energy blade sliced through the air towards Freeman's throat. In that frozen moment, a blur of motion interposed itself between the two men. Rigel materialized, arms spread wide. Stop! Her voice cracked like thunder, halting Zorax's attack mere inches from her face. This madness ends now. Zorax's eyes blazed with fury, but his blade wavered. Step aside, Rigel. These humans will be our doom. No, Rigel countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. They are our salvation. She turned, addressing the gathered crowd of colonists and human soldiers. Look around you. We were moments from annihilation before the retribution arrived. Captain Freeman and his crew bled for us, died for us. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rigel pressed on, her words gaining strength. We've all lost so much to the Crocs, homes, families, entire worlds, but divided we fall. United, we have a chance. Some of Zorax's followers lowered their weapons, uncertainty replacing anger in their eyes. Zorax himself faltered, his energy blade flickering and dying. Commander Thorn stepped forward, his face grim. There's more at stake here than you realize. He activated a holographic display, revealing swirling streams of data. Rigel and I have been analyzing Croc's communication intercepts. We've discovered something game-changing. The projection coalesced into an image of Zephyria, with pulsing red hotspots scattered across its surface. These are deposits of a rare mineral, one the Crocs are harvesting to fuel their war machine. Gasps and exclamations erupted from the crowd. Freeman's eyes narrowed, a cold fire igniting within them. If we can disrupt their mining operation, we could cripple their entire conquest, Thorn finished. Freeman nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. He turned to Zorax, who still stood frozen in indecision. "Stand down, soldier. I have a proposition for you." Zorax's fingers tightened on his deactivated blade, muscles coiled to spring. But after a long, tense moment, he slowly lowered his weapon. "I'm listening." Freeman outlined his plan. A small joint team of humans and colonists would infiltrate the Crocs mining facility, planting explosives to sabotage their operation. Zorax's eyes widened at the audacity of it. "It's suicide," he growled, but there was a hint of grudging admiration in his voice. "Perhaps," Freeman acknowledged, "but it's our best shot at striking a real blow against the Crocs. Your people know this terrain better than anyone. We need you." Zorax's face twisted through a gamut of emotions: suspicion, anger, and finally a grim grit. "I'll lead the colonial contingent myself." As the infiltration team began preparations, Rigel found herself drawn to Captain Freeman. The human stood apart from the others, staring out at the scarred landscape of Zephyria. "You've given us hope," Rigel said softly, moving to stand beside him. "Something I thought we'd lost forever." Freeman's expression resolute, his eyes haunted. "Hope is a dangerous thing, Rigel. I've seen what the Crocs do to those who dare to dream." Rigel studied his face, seeing the weight of unspeakable memories etched in every line. "You were their prisoner once, weren't you?" Freeman nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "What they did to me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm fighting to save all of the galaxy, or just to silence the screams in my head." Rigel reached out, her hand hovering near his before gently grasping it. "Maybe it can be both." As the infiltration team moved out, led by Zorax and Thorn, tension crackled through the air. They slipped through rocky crevasses and dense foliage, the Crocs mining facility looming before them like a cancerous growth on Zephyria's surface. Thorn signaled a halt, his voice low. "Remember the plan. We plant the charges and get out. No unnecessary risks." Zorax grunted in acknowledgement, but his eyes gleamed with a nearly unleashed fury. As they breached the facility's outer defenses, that fury threatened to boil over. Alarms blared. Crocs guards poured from side passages. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as the infiltration team fought their way deeper into the complex. "This way!" Zorax roared, charging ahead. Thorn cursed, trying to maintain formation, but the Zephyrian warrior was beyond reach. They battled through twisting corridors, leaving a trail of Crocs' bodies in their wake. As they reached the heart of the facility, Zorax skidded to a halt, his eyes wide with shock. Before them stretched a cavernous chamber, filled with towering vats of glowing mineral. The stockpile dwarfed anything they had imagined. "By the void," Thorn breathed, "there's enough here to fuel their conquest for decades." Zorax's face contorted with rage and triumph. "Then we end it. Now!" He began frantically rigging explosives, far more than their plan called for. Thorn grabbed his arm. "Stop! You'll destabilize the entire region, the colony." "We'll be safe," Zorax snarled, shoving Thorn away, "once we obliterate the Crocs' power source." As the two men grappled, their comm units crackled to life. Freeman's voice cut through the chaos. "Abort mission! We're detecting seismic instabilities. Get out of there now!" But Zorax was beyond reason, his finger hovering over the detonator. Thorn lunged, desperation lending him speed. In the colony, Freeman barked orders for immediate evacuation. Rigel coordinated the exodus, fear and grit warring in her heart. Freeman turned to her, his face set in grim lines. "I'm going in after them." Rigel nodded, understanding the weight of his decision. "I'm coming with you." As they raced towards the mining facility, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The fate of Zephyria, and perhaps the entire war, hung in the balance. Freeman's mind whirled with calculations, strategies, and the growing fear that his quest for vengeance might doom them all. Freeman's boots pounded against the metal flooring as he sprinted towards the mining complex, Rigel close on his heels. The ground beneath them shuddered ominously, sending vibrations up through their legs. "Life signs?" Freeman barked into his comm unit. "2 heat signatures detected," came the tinny reply. "Upper level, northwest quadrant." They burst through the facility's entrance, alarms blaring all around them. The acrid smell of ozone and burning circuitry filled the air. Freeman led the way, his blaster at the ready as they navigated the twisting corridors. A thunderous crash echoed from above, followed by the unmistakable sound of energy weapons discharging. Freeman and Rigel exchanged a grim look before double-timing it up a nearby access ramp. They emerged into chaos. Zorax and Thorn grappled on the floor, surrounded by sparking consoles and shattered view screens. Zorax's face was contorted in a rictus of hate as he clawed for a detonator lying just out of reach. "Stand down!" Freeman roared, leveling his weapon at the pair. Thorn's head snapped up, relief evident in his eyes. "Sir, he's lost it. He's going to blow the whole damn place." In that split second of distraction, Zorax surged forward. His fingers closed around the detonator. Time seemed to slow. Freeman saw Zorax's thumb descending towards the trigger. With a burst of speed born of desperation, the captain hurled himself across the room. He collided with Zorax in a tangle of limbs. The detonator skittered across the floor. Thorn lunged for it, scooping it up and immediately beginning to disarm the device. But Zorax was far from finished. With a bellow of rage, he drove his knee into Freeman's solar plexus. The captain's breath exploded from his lungs. Zorax capitalized on the opening, shoving Freeman aside and scrambling to his feet. "You fools!" Zorax snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "This is our chance to crush the Crocs once and for all." He charged at Thorn, who was still working feverishly to disable the explosives. Freeman, gasping for air, could only watch as Zorax barreled into his second-in-command. The two went down in a heap, the detonator flying from Thorn's grasp. Time seemed to freeze as the device arced through the air. It clattered to the ground, rolling to a stop at Zorax's feet. The Zephyrian's eyes gleamed with triumph as he snatched it up. "For Zephyria!" he cried, jamming his thumb down on the trigger. "No!" Freeman shouted, but it was too late. A distant rumble grew to a deafening roar. The floor beneath them bucked violently, throwing everyone off their feet. Zorax used the chaos to his advantage, darting for a side passage. Freeman scrambled up, his voice hoarse as he bellowed into his comm unit. "All personnel, evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." He turned to Rigel and Thorn, who were pulling themselves to their feet. "Get to the ships. I'm going after Zorax." Rigel opened her mouth to protest, but Freeman cut her off. "That's an order. Go!" Without waiting for a response, he plunged into the corridor after Zorax. The passageway twisted and turned, emergency lights casting everything in a hellish red glow. The complex groaned and shuddered around him as the chain reaction of explosions spread. Freeman rounded a corner and skidded to a stop. Zorax stood at the far end of the hallway, his chest heaving. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the universe seemed to contract to just the two of them. Then Zorax charged, a primal scream tearing from his throat. Freeman braced himself, years of combat training kicking in as Zorax closed the distance. The two men collided in a flurry of strikes. Zorax fought with the desperate fury of a cornered animal, while Freeman's movements were precise, each blow carefully calculated. They traded punches, grappled, and slammed each other into the corridor's walls as the facility crumbled around them. A particularly violent tremor sent them both stumbling. Freeman capitalized on the opening, driving his fist into Zorax's solar plexus. As the Zephyrian doubled over, gasping, Freeman seized him in a chokehold. Zorax thrashed wildly, but Freeman held firm. Slowly, inexorably, the fight drained out of the rebel leader. Just as Zorax's struggles began to weaken, a deafening boom shook the entire complex. Freeman's comm crackled to life. "Captain!" It was Thorn, his voice tight with urgency. "You need to get out of there now. The whole region is destabilizing." Keeping Zorax restrained, Freeman began to retrace his steps, The journey back was a nightmare of collapsing ceilings, ruptured pipes spewing steam, and floors that threatened to give way with each step. They emerged into the Zephyrian twilight, coughing and stumbling. The Retribution loomed before them, its engines already spooling up for takeoff. Freeman half-dragged, half-carried the semi-conscious Zorax up the loading ramp. As soon as they were aboard, Freeman bellowed, "Go! Get us out of here!" The ship lurched into motion. Through the viewports, Freeman watched in horror as fissures spiderwebbed across the planet's surface. Entire sections of the colony were swallowed by the quaking earth. Rigel appeared at his side, her face ashen. The other ships... Freeman's heart sank as he realized the truth. There hadn't been time. The colony's vessels sat where they had landed, their crews scrambling in vain to power up the engines before the ground gave way beneath them. The Retribution clawed its way into the upper atmosphere, leaving behind a world torn apart by Zorax's reckless actions. But even as they broke free of Zephyria's gravity well, alarms began to blare throughout the ship. "Multiple contacts incoming," a sensor operator called out. "It's a Crocs battle group, at least a dozen capital ships." Freeman's blood ran cold. He turned to his chief engineer. "Status of our warp drive?" The man's face was grim. "Offline, sir. The ground quakes damaged the coils. We're dead in the water." A hush fell over the bridge as the implications sank in. They were trapped, outnumbered, with no way to escape or call for reinforcements. Freeman's mind raced, searching for options where none seemed to exist. It was Rigel who broke the silence. "Captain," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, "there might be a way, but you're not going to like it." "There might be a way," Rigel repeated, her eyes locked on Freeman's. "The wave disruptor." Freeman's breath caught. The experimental weapon was their trump card, a closely guarded secret. "It's not powered up. We don't have the—" "Zephyrite," Thorne interrupted, understanding dawning on his face. "The mineral we came here for in the first place." Freeman's mind raced, weighing their options as the Crocs fleet loomed ever closer on the tactical displays. He made his decision. "Prep a landing team," he ordered, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through his body. "We're going back down there." Within minutes, Freeman led a strike force back to Zephyria's fractured surface. The planet was nearly unrecognizable, a hellscape of fire and ash. Fissures belched noxious gases, and the ground trembled ominously beneath their feet. "Fan out," Freeman commanded. "We need to find any surviving pockets of colonists. They might have access to shelter and Zephyrite." As they picked their way through the devastation, a familiar voice crackled over their comms. "This is Outpost Gamma. Any survivors out there?" Freeman's eyebrows furrowed. It was Zorax. They found the rebel leader in a group of shell-shocked colonists, huddled in an underground bunker. Zorax's eyes widened as Freeman entered, a mix of defiance and fear playing across his face. "You!" Zorax spat. Freeman's fists clenched, every fiber of his being screaming to exact vengeance for Zephyria's destruction. But there wasn't time. "We need your help," Freeman ground out. "The defensive systems—" A distant rumble cut him off. The bunker's sensors flared to life, displaying a terrifying sight. Crocs dropships descending through the atmosphere. "We've got company," Thorne announced grimly. Freeman turned to Zorax. "You know this planet's defenses better than anyone. Help us, or we all die here." For a long moment, Zorax said nothing. Then with a curt nod, he strode to a control panel. "I can get the auto turrets online," he said, "but we'll need to manually activate the shield generators at these locations." He highlighted several points on a holomap. Freeman divided his team, assigning each group a generator. As they moved out, the first Crocs forces touched down. The next hours were a blur of frantic combat. Freeman's strike team fought their way through waves of Crocs shock troops, the aliens' inhuman shrieks filling the air. They raced from one shield generator to the next, each activation buying them precious time. At the third generator, a Crocs energy blast caught Freeman in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. As he struggled to his feet, the world around him blurred. Suddenly, he was back in the Crocs prison camp. The stench of fear and despair filled his nostrils. Alien hands reached for him, promising fresh torments. "Captain!" Rigel's voice cut through the haze. Her hand gripped his arm, anchoring him to reality. "Stay with me. We're almost there." Freeman blinked, forcing the memories away. He nodded gratefully to Rigel, then led the charge to the final generator. With the shields raised, they regrouped at a Zephyrite mining outpost. As Thorn coordinated the mineral extraction, Freeman's comm crackled. "Sir," came the voice of his XO aboard the Retribution. "Croc's capital ships entering orbit. ETA to firing range, 10 minutes. Freeman looked to Thorn, who nodded. "We've got enough Zephyrite, but sir, powering up the disruptor might be too much for the planet to handle." A series of violent tremors punctuated Thorn's words. Zephyria was coming apart at the seams. "If we don't use it, we're dead anyway," Freeman said. He opened a channel to the Retribution. "Prep for immediate evac. All personnel, fall back to the ship." As colonists and strike team members piled into shuttles, Freeman made for the disruptor's control center. Rigel fell into step beside him. "You should go," he told her. She shook her head. "Not without you." They reached the controls, fingers flying over holographic interfaces. The disruptor hummed to life, its power building to a crescendo. Zorax burst into the room wild-eyed. "What are you doing? You'll destroy everything!" "We don't have a choice," Freeman snapped. The rebel leader lunged for the controls. Freeman intercepted him, the two men grappling as the disruptor's whine grew louder. "Rigel, go!" Freeman shouted as he struggled with Zorax. "Get to the ship!" She hesitated for a split second, then sprinted for the exit. As the door hissed shut behind her, Freeman finally overpowered Zorax, knocking him unconscious. Alarms blared as the facility began to shake itself apart. Freeman's hands danced over the controls, channeling every ounce of power into the disruptor. On his tactical display, he watched the Retribution break atmosphere, rising to meet the Croc's armada. The alien ships opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up the sky. Freeman took a deep breath and pressed the firing sequence. A wave of pure energy erupted from the planet's surface, engulfing everything in its path. The Croc's ships sparked and went dark, plummeting from orbit like so many dead insects. But the force was too much for Zephyria. The planet's core destabilized, massive chunks of the surface breaking free and drifting into space. As the control room collapsed around him, Freeman caught a final glimpse of the Retribution, battered but intact, limping away from the devastation. Then his world went dark. Black. Freeman's eyes snapped open, his lungs burning as he gasped for air. Debris rained down around him, the control room reduced to twisted metal and sparking circuitry. He pulled himself up, wincing at the stabbing pain in his side. "Captain," Thorn's voice crackled through his comm. "Do you read?" "I'm here," Freeman croaked, stumbling towards the exit. "Status report." "We made it out, sir, but Zephyria." Freeman emerged into chaos. The planet was breaking apart, massive chunks drifting into the void. The Retribution hung in orbit, its hull scorched and battered. A shuttle swooped low, Rigel at the controls. "Let's go, Captain!" As they ascended, Freeman watched his homeworld die. The guilt threatened to consume him, but he pushed it aside. There would be time for mourning later. Aboard the Retribution, alarms blared. The bridge was a hive of frantic activity as crew members fought to keep systems online. "Warp drives offline," Rigel reported, her fingers flying across a console. "We're sitting ducks out here." "Multiple Croc signatures detected," a sensor operator called out. "They're regrouping, sir." Freeman's mind raced. They were crippled, outnumbered, with no way to escape or call for help. He opened his mouth to give an order, but a sudden wave of dizziness washed over him. Images flashed through his mind. Alien corridors, strange technology, the sensation of being prodded and examined. He stumbled, gripping the command chair for support. "Captain?" Rigel's concerned voice cut through the haze. Freeman blinked, forcing the visions away. "I'm fine," he lied. "Options?" Before anyone could respond, a new alert sounded. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from a Crocs vessel." The bridge fell silent. Freeman straightened, steeling himself. On screen. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a Crocs unlike any Freeman had seen before. Its carapace was scarred and pitted, one eye replaced by a cybernetic implant. "I am Zorgrath," the alien rasped, "commander of the Crocs 7th Fleet. I seek parley with your captain." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the bridge. Freeman held up a hand for silence. "This is Captain Edward Freeman of the ISS Retribution. Why should we trust anything you have to say?" Zorgrath's mandibles clicked. "Because, human, we both stand on the precipice of annihilation. The wave disruptor's destruction of our fleet has left us vulnerable. We propose a temporary ceasefire." Freeman's eyes narrowed. "At what price?" "Safe passage for your colonists," Zorgrath said, "in exchange for the secrets of your weapon technology." The bridge erupted in protest. Freeman silenced them with a look, even as his own instincts screamed that this was a trap. "I'll need time to consider your offer," he said carefully. Zorgrath inclined its head. "You have one planetary rotation. Choose wisely, Captain." The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Freeman turned to his crew, their faces a mix of hope and suspicion. "Sir," Thorne spoke up, "you can't seriously be considering this. After everything they've done—" "I'm considering all our options, Commander," Freeman interrupted. "Rigel, status on the warp drive?" The Lurian engineer shook her head. "It's bad, Captain. We might be able to get it operational, but it'll take time we don't have." Freeman nodded, his expression grim. "Then we need to buy that time. Prep a shuttle. I'm going to meet with Zorgrath face to face." Gasps and protests filled the air. Rigel stepped forward, her luminous eyes wide with concern. "Captain, you can't. It's too dangerous." "It's our only chance," Freeman said firmly. "If there's even a possibility of getting our people to safety, I have to take it." As the crew scrambled to prepare for the meeting, Freeman retreated to his quarters. He leaned against the wall, his head pounding. The strange visions returned, stronger this time. Crocs technology, pulsing with alien energy, somehow familiar. A cold realization settled over him. What had they done to him during his captivity? The door chimed, interrupting his thoughts. "Enter!" he called out. Thorne stepped inside, his face a mask of concern. "Sir, I must object to this meeting. We can't trust the Crocs." Freeman sighed. "I know, old friend, but we're out of options. I need you to—" A deafening explosion rocked the ship, cutting him off. Alarms blared as Freeman and Thorne raced back to the bridge. "Report," Freeman barked. "It's Zorax," Rigel shouted over the chaos. "He's escaped custody and sabotaged the shuttle bay. He's trying to launch an attack on the Crocs ship." Freeman's blood ran cold. If Zorax succeeded, any chance of negotiation would be lost. They'd be dead in the water, with the full might of the Crocs bearing down upon them. "Lock down all systems," he ordered. "I'm going after him myself." As Freeman sprinted towards the shuttle bay, his mind raced. The fate of his crew, the colonists, and perhaps the entire galaxy hung in the balance. And deep within him, the strange connection to the Crocs technology pulsed, a constant reminder of the price he'd paid for survival. The true battle, he realized, was only just beginning. Freeman gritted his teeth against another wave of disorientation as the Crocs neural implant sent jolts of alien sensations through his mind. He steadied himself on the command chair, fighting to maintain control. "Sir, we've cleared the debris field," Rigel reported, her luminous eyes fixed on the navigation console. "But our warp drive is still offline. We're adrift." Freeman nodded grimly. "Set a course for the outer reaches. We need to put as much distance between us and the Crocs as possible." As the Retribution limped away from the remnants of Zephyria, Freeman retreated to his quarters. He stared at his reflection in the viewport, barely recognizing the haggard face that looked back at him. The weight of an entire world's destruction pressed down on his shoulders. A sudden surge of rage coursed through him, and he smacked his head against the bulkhead. The pain helped clear his head, but the lingering influence of the Croc's implant whispered dark thoughts at the edges of his consciousness. Days passed as the ship drifted through unfamiliar star systems. The mood aboard the Retribution grew increasingly tense as supplies dwindled and the threat of Croc's pursuit loomed large. On the 8th day, a shout from the bridge snapped Freeman out of his brooding. "Captain!" It was Thorne, excitement evident in his voice. "Long-range sensors have picked up an uncharted system, and, sir, there's a planet, Earth-like." Hope, fragile but undeniable, spread through the crew as they approached the new world. Scans revealed a verdant paradise, rich in minerals and untouched by advanced civilization. "Oraxis," Freeman murmured, naming their potential salvation. "Prep a shuttle. We're going down there." As the landing party touched down on Oraxis's lush surface, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. A group of alien beings approached, their movements peaceful and welcoming. They were bipedal, with iridescent skin and large, expressive eyes. "Impossible," Zorax muttered, his hand tightening on his weapon. "This planet was supposed to be uninhabited." Freeman shot him a warning glance before stepping forward to greet the aliens. To everyone's surprise, the beings communicated through a form of rudimentary telepathy, conveying their peaceful intentions. Over the next few days, a tenuous alliance formed. The Oraxians, though technologically primitive, offered what aid they could to the beleaguered colonists. Freeman organized teams to begin mining operations, while Rigel worked tirelessly to adapt the wave disruptor into a planetary defense system. But as the colonists settled in, tensions began to simmer. Zorax grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that the Oraxians harbored secret agendas or powerful, unseen allies. "We can't trust them," he hissed to Freeman during a strategy meeting. "They're hiding something. I can feel it." Freeman felt a fresh surge of alien influence from his implant, amplifying his own doubts. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. "We need their help, Zorax. Without them, we're sitting ducks for the Crocs." Despite Freeman's efforts to maintain peace, Zorax's faction grew more restless. The breaking point came during a resource allocation meeting. An argument erupted, and in the chaos, several Oraxian elders were injured. The planet erupted into near-open warfare. Freeman found himself caught between the two sides, struggling to maintain order while fighting the growing darkness within his own mind. In a desperate bid to salvage the situation, Freeman confronted Zorax directly. The two men faced off in the shadow of the half-completed defense grid. "This ends now," Freeman growled, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Stand down, or I'll have you confined to the brig." Zorax's eyes narrowed. "You're blind, Freeman. Can't you see what's really going on here?" He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been in contact with a Croc spy. They claim to have the key to destroying the Empire once and for all." Freeman's blood ran cold. "You've been communicating with the enemy?" "Sometimes you have to deal with devils to defeat monsters," Zorax spat. "The spy wants to meet. They promise answers. About the Crocs, about your implant, about everything." Before Freeman could respond, alarms blared across the colony. Rigel's voice crackled over the comms, tight with fear. "Captain, we've got incoming. Massive Crocs fleet on approach. They'll be here within hours." Freeman's mind raced. They weren't ready. The defenses were incomplete. The colonists divided. He looked at Zorax, seeing his own desperate calculation mirrored in the other man's eyes. "We need that spy," Freeman said finally. "But so help me, if this is a trick." Zorax nodded grimly. "I'll make the call." As they hurried back to the command center, Freeman felt the weight of impossible choices bearing down on him. Reveal the Oraxians and call for help, potentially dooming another innocent world, or face the Crocs alone, with only the promises of an enemy spy to rely on. The implant pulsed in his mind, offering power, offering answers. Freeman clenched his fists, fighting against its seductive whispers. Whatever came next, he knew the true battle was only just beginning. Freeman's comm unit crackled to life, Rigel's voice tight with urgency. "Captain, long-range sensors confirm it. The Crocs fleet has entered the system." He tightened fists, staring out over the lush Oraxian landscape, The weight of another world's fate pressed down on him, threatening to crush his persistence. But he wouldn't let Oraxis share Zephyria's fate. "Rigel, initiate Operation Phantom," Freeman ordered. "Thorn, prep the ground teams. Zorax, bring me that spy." The Retribution shimmered into invisibility as it ascended into the upper atmosphere. Freeman watched the holographic camouflage engulf the ship, a gossamer veil against the stars. On the planet's surface, human colonists worked alongside Oraxians, their earlier conflicts forgotten in the face of impending annihilation. They burrowed deep, concealing wave disruptor nodes within a labyrinth of underground tunnels. Rigel's hands flew across her console, fine-tuning the disruptor's frequency. "Captain, if this works, we'll have one shot, maybe two. After that..." Freeman nodded grimly. "Then we make them count." Days passed in a blur of feverish activity. The first Croc ships breached the atmosphere, their sensors detecting nothing but an undefended paradise. Freeman watched from the cloak bridge as transport after transport disgorged its lethal cargo. "They're taking the bait," Thorn reported, his voice low. "A third of their fleet has committed to ground operations." Freeman's implant throbbed, alien whispers promising power, vengeance. He pushed them aside, focusing on the tactical display. "Now we spring the trap." But before he could give the order, alarms blared. Zorax burst onto the bridge, dragging a bound Croc spy. "We've been compromised," he snarled. "The spy claims one of our own has turned." Chaos erupted. Accusations flew as paranoia gripped the crew. In the confusion, evidence surfaced, implicating Thorn. Freeman watched in disbelief as his second-in-command was dragged away, protesting his innocence. The disruptor array faltered, its carefully calibrated frequencies fluctuating wildly. Freeman's mind raced. Trust Thorn and risk everything, or activate the array and potentially destroy Oraxis itself? The implant pulsed again, stronger this time. Freeman gripped the command chair, his vision swimming with alien corridors and strange, pulsing energy. He saw the Croc's armada through inhuman eyes, felt the thrill of impending conquest. "Sir," Rigel's voice cut through the haze, "we're out of time. What are your orders?" Freeman looked up, meeting her luminous gaze. In that moment, he made his choice. "Rigel, lock down the disruptor controls. No one touches that array without my direct authorization." He turned to Zorax. "You and your team secure Thorn. I want him under guard, but unharmed." Freeman strode to the tactical display, studying the Croc's formations with newfound clarity. "Prepare to decloak on my mark. We're going to hit them where they least expect it." As the crew scrambled to obey, Freeman closed his eyes, allowing the alien influence to wash over him. For the first time since his captivity, he embraced it, sifting through the flood of information for the key to victory. The Retribution's cloak flickered and fell away, revealing the massive warship to the unsuspecting Crocs below. Freeman's eyes snapped open, blazing with tenacity and something else, something alien and terrible. "All hands," he commanded, his voice resonating with unnatural power. "Prepare for combat." "Battle," Freeman commanded, his voice resonating with unnatural power. "All hands, prepare for full engagement." The Retribution's weapons systems hummed to life as the ship descended through Oraxis' atmosphere. Freeman's eyes darted across the tactical displays, his Croc's implant feeding him a torrent of strategic data. "Sir, what about Thorn?" Rigel asked, her fingers poised over the disruptor controls. Freeman's eyes sharp. "We can't afford to hesitate. Activate the array." Rigel nodded, entering the final command sequence. Across Oraxis, hidden disruptor nodes pulsed with energy. In a blinding flash, a massive wave of electromagnetic force swept across the planet's surface. The effect was instantaneous. Croc's dropships plummeted from the sky, their engines dead. Ground vehicles ground to a halt, weapons systems fizzling into silence. On the bridge of the Retribution, Freeman watched as the invasion force crumbled. "All batteries, open fire," he ordered. The Retribution's guns blazed, tearing through the defenseless Croc's capital ships. Explosions blossomed in the upper atmosphere as the once mighty armada disintegrated under the relentless barrage. But even as victory seemed assured, alarms blared across the bridge. Zorax burst in, his face contorted with rage. "Freeman, you fool! Look what you've done!" On the main view screen, seismic readings spiked ominously. The planet's core, destabilized by the massive energy discharge, was tearing itself apart. "Evacuation protocols now!" Freeman shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get every colonist and Oraxian off this rock!" The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Shuttles and salvage Crocs dropships ferried refugees to the Retribution and other orbiting vessels. Freeman coordinated the exodus from the bridge, pushing aside the growing ache in his skull as his implant screamed with alien anguish. "Captain," Rigel's voice crackled over the comms. "The last shuttles are away, but I can't leave yet. Someone has to manage the ground systems." Freeman's heart clenched. "Rigel, no! There's no time!" "It's the only way," she replied, her tone resolute. "Go, sir. Save our people." With a heavy heart, Freeman gave the order to break orbit. The Retribution accelerated away from the doomed world, Oraxis's surface already fracturing beneath them. As they cleared the atmosphere, Freeman initiated an emergency warp jump, the ship vanishing in a burst of light. In the aftermath, the mood aboard the Retribution was somber. Refugees huddled in every available space, shell-shocked and grieving. Freeman retreated to his quarters, his heart pounding from the day's events. A chime at his door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called out. Zorax strode in, his eyes blazing with hardly restrained fury. "You've gone too far this time, Freeman. Rigel is dead because of you. The Oraxian's world is ash. How many more will die before you're satisfied?" Freeman rose to face him, fighting against the disorienting visions assaulting his mind. "We had no choice. The Crocs would have—" "Spare me your excuses," Zorax spat. "You're compromised. That implant has corrupted you. I won't let you drag us down with you." Before Freeman could respond, the ship rocked violently. Alarms blared as Thorn's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, to the bridge! We've got company!" Racing to the command center, Freeman found barely controlled chaos. On the main view screen, a sleek vessel was rapidly closing distance. "Crocs?" Freeman demanded. Thorn shook his head. "No, sir. It's one of ours. A scout ship." As they watched, a familiar voice crackled over the comms. "Retribution, this is Rigel. Request immediate docking clearance." Joy and disbelief warred on Freeman's face as he gave the order. Minutes later, Rigel strode onto the bridge, battered but alive. She met Freeman's gaze, her eyes shining with dedication. "Captain," she said, her voice steady, "we need to talk. I've discovered something that changes everything." "Captain," Rigel said, her eyes grave, "the disruptor technology, it's unstable. Our tests on Oraxis triggered a cascade effect we couldn't have predicted. If we don't find a way to contain it, the consequences could be catastrophic." Before Freeman could respond, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared as the lighting flickered, plunging the bridge into momentary darkness. "Report!" Freeman barked as emergency power engaged. Thorn's fingers flew across his console. "Sir, we've got multiple hull breaches. Security feeds show armed insurgents pouring out of the lower decks." Freeman's implant throbbed, feeding him fragmented tactical data. He saw flashes of Zorax, leading a heavily armed group through the corridors. "It's Zorax," he growled. "He's made his move." The bridge door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Smoke billowed as Zorax stepped through, flanked by a squad of mutineers, their weapons trained on Freeman and his loyal officers. "It's over, Freeman," Zorax snarled. "Surrender the disruptor plans and step down, or this gets ugly." Freeman's hand inched towards his sidearm. "You're making a mistake, Zorax. We're all that stands between humanity and—" A burst of weapons fire cut him off, forcing Freeman to dive for cover. The bridge erupted into chaos as loyalists and mutineers exchanged fire. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, filling the air with acrid smoke. Through the haze, Freeman saw Rigel working furiously at her station. "Captain!" she shouted over the din. "The warp drive's been hit. We're dead in the water." Freeman gritted his teeth, his implant pulsing with alien data. He saw tactical overlays, ship schematics, optimum firing solutions. The power was intoxicating, but each surge sent waves of agony through his skull. "Thorn!" he called out. "Get to engineering. We need that drive back online." But as Thorn made for the exit, a new group of insurgents burst in. They dragged a battered figure with them, shoving him to his knees before Zorax. "Thorn?" Freeman's eyes widened in shock. "But how?" Zorax's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Oh, Captain, did you really think your precious second-in-command was loyal? He's been working for us all along." The Thorn at the console flickered and vanished. A hologram. The real Thorn, bruised and bloodied, looked up at Freeman with haunted eyes. "I'm sorry, sir," he croaked. "They got to me. Promised to save what was left of Zephyria if I helped them." Zorax pressed his weapon against Thorn's temple. "Now, Freeman, the disruptor plans. Or I put a hole in your friend's head and move down the line until there's no one left." Freeman's mind raced. The implant screamed, offering solutions, each more violent than the last. He felt something building within him, a pressure like a dam about to burst. "Rigel," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Initiate Protocol Omega." Rigel's eyes widened in understanding. Her fingers danced across her console, entering a complex series of commands. "What are you doing?" Zorax demanded, his weapon wavering. Freeman allowed himself a grim smile. "Something you'll regret forcing me to do." The pressure in his skull reached a crescendo. With a primal roar, Freeman unleashed a wave of psionic energy that swept across the bridge. Zorax and his men crumpled, clutching their heads in agony. But the release came at a cost. Freeman felt the implants destabilizing, threatening to tear him apart from the inside. "Rigel," he gasped, "how long?" 20 seconds to ejection," she replied, her fingers flying across the controls. Freeman staggered towards the fallen Thorn, hauling him to his feet. "Come on, old friend, we're getting out of here." As they limped towards the emergency escape pods, the ship shuddered. With a deafening screech of tearing metal, the engineering section tore free, taking Freeman and the incapacitated mutineers with it. The last thing Rigel and Thorn saw before the blast doors sealed was Freeman's determined face, silhouetted against the inferno of the disruptor's final activation. A blinding flash lit up space as the ejected section imploded. When the light faded, there was nothing left but slowly expanding debris. On the crippled bridge of the Retribution, Rigel and Thorn stared at the void where their captain had been. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crackle of damaged systems and the labored breathing of shell-shock survivors. "He's gone," Thorn whispered, his voice hoarse. "Freeman, Zorax, the Disruptor, all of it." Rigel's hand trembled as she checked the long-range sensors. Her breath caught in her throat. "Thorn," she said, her voice tight with fear. "We've got company."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.